Hey Gabe, do you see those cows back there? I wonder what they're doing in that field.
Yeah, Dylan. Well, cows are herbivores, so they're grazing. That's what it's called when they eat grass.
Wow, it looks like they've eaten a lot of it. Check out this fence right here. On the other side, where there's no cows, the grass is much taller over there. So that must mean where there's cows, there's not much grass left, and where there are no cows, there's plenty of grass for other animals to live in and feed on.
This is a good example of a resource in an ecosystem. However much grass is in the ecosystem determines the carrying capacity, or the largest population size an ecosystem can support.
Exactly. In this ecosystem, the grass is the resource and the cows are the consumer of that resource. Another example is wolves and deer, where wolves are the consumer and deer are the resource. That actually reminds me of the story about elk and wolves in Yellowstone National Park.
Well, what happened with the elk and wolves in Yellowstone?
Well, sometimes there's too many consumers and not enough resources in an ecosystem, like you were explaining. In this case, the elk, or the consumers, were eating a lot of the vegetation in the park, which reduced that resource for other animals that live there. This happened because there were no more wolves to keep the elk population in balance.
Wow, I bet the ecosystem really changed without the wolves there.
You're right. When an ecosystem goes through a big change, it's called a disturbance, and sometimes results in a new ecosystem with new species. Disturbances can be small, like a flood, or they can be really big, like a wildfire or overharvesting of a plant or animal species.
It sounds like the loss of the wolves was a big disturbance in this ecosystem. What did the scientists decide to do with the wolves and elk?
Well, the scientists realized that they needed to reintroduce the wolves into the ecosystem so that the wolves were the consumer of the elk resource again. With less elk consuming the vegetation, there would be more food and shelter for other animals, like trees for birds or bushes for small mammals.
Did the plan work? Was there a new healthy ecosystem created after the disturbance and the reintroduction of the wolves?
It did work. The Yellowstone National Park now has a really healthy ecosystem with a larger carrying capacity than before the reintroduction of the wolves. Do you think something similar could happen in the ocean?
I bet it does. When I scuba dive off the California coast, I see a lot of urchins and not as much fish and kelp. It seems like the urchins are the consumers of kelp in this coastal ecosystem, and they may have exceeded their carrying capacity like we explained.
Well, how can we find out how many urchins and how much kelp there are in an ecosystem?
We can do an underwater translate survey to see how the urchin abundance affects the kelp abundance and what happens if there's a big disturbance. Have you done a transect survey underwater before?
I haven't. What do we need?
We'll need our scuba gear, a transect tape, like a really long tape measure, and a dive slate so we can count the urchins and kelp we see. We'll look at a kelp forest and an area with lots of urchins called an urchin barren. Then we can calculate abundance and make some comparisons.
Awesome. Sounds great. I'll meet you in Monterey and we'll go do a survey.
Sounds good.